Hi there, this is Al24 News live from Algiers. Coming up next in our news program. Tunisians commemorate today the 11th anniversary of the revolution that toppled the late President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali Plus. Boris's Conservative Party lost its North Shropshire seat, having held it for almost 200 years. The loss came as pressure intensifies against the British Prime Minister. Also coming up, Brussels hosts the Eastern Partnership Summit, which includes on one side the Eastern Union and on the other side 6 Eastern European countries amid rising tensions between Russia and the West. Tunisians commemorate today the 11th anniversary of the revolution that toppled the late President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali. On this day, in the year 2010, the young man Mohamed Bouazizi burned himself in the governorate of Sidi Bouzid in protest against injustice, which sparked protests that expanded to various Tunisian cities. The annual celebrations have become official after President Kais Saied announced 2 weeks ago that the Revolution Day would be changed to every 17th of December instead of the usual date of 14th of January, amid political and popular division over Kais Saied's exceptional decisions. Islam Sidi reports.
11 years have passed since Yasmin Revolution, which overthrew the regime of former President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, who took rule of the country for more than 23 years. On this day in 2010, specifically in the province of Sidi Bouzid, thousands of Tunisians took the streets to protest against social inequality, corruption aggravated by the regime, and the dire living conditions. The first protest was sparked by the death of Mohamed Bouazizi, the vendor who protested against unemployment, an oppression to which he was subjected. The desire to establish a long-term democratic path in the country remains beyond reach due to the ongoing political division since President Kais Saied announced his unexpected procedures series of mid-June. The president implementation of a new roadmap would keep the parliament frozen until making legislative elections in a year's time, in preparation for the holding of a referendum for constitutional reforms next summer. This has intensified conflict, urging political parties to demonstrate today as an act of rejection of the president's one-sided step. Indeed, Tunisia is going through a delicate and thorough phase, waiting for the opposing sides to find a resolution to put an end to political and popular division.
Zionist missiles struck areas in southern Syria, killing one regime soldier and causing some damage. One soldier was killed and strikes caused material damage. The official added that most of the incoming missiles were intercepted by Syrian air defenses. The latest report of the United Nations said that hunger is creeping into the Arab countries in both the Middle East and North Africa. It revealed the deterioration humanitarian situation in the Arab region, especially Yemen and Somalia. Zahra Farjani reports.
The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations reported that in 2020, 69 million people suffered from malnutrition in the Arab world, where a third of the 420 million inhabitants do not have access to adequate food. The report also stated that between 2019 and 2020, 4.8 million inhabitants of the Arab world suffered from malnutrition. However, the two most affected countries remain Somalia, where 59.5% of the inhabitants suffer from hunger, and Yemen, where the hunger affects 45.4% of the population. Yemen also holds the sad record for anemia, which in 2020 affected 61.5% of women of childbearing age. The Food and Agriculture Organization estimates starvation has increased by 91.1% in the Arab world over the past 20 years. It brings with it public health problems. 20.5% of the region's children under 5 suffer from stunting, and 10.7% of them are overweight. According to the FAO, the issue of obesity in adults is also an increasing concern in the Arab world, with a constant increase since year 2000. In 2020, it reached 28.8%, more than double the world average of 13.1%. The most affected countries are the richest, led by the Gulf, with a peak of 37.4% in Kuwait.
Boris's Conservative Party lost its North Shropshire seat, having held it for almost 200 years. The loss came as pressure intensifies against the British Prime Minister.
Boris Johnson's Conservative Party was defeated in a by-election. Since its establishment in 1983, North Shropshire has always sent a Conservative Member of Parliament to London, and the Conservatives re-won the seat in 2019 with a very comfortable 23,000 votes. In her victory speech, Liberal Democrat candidate Ellen Morgan, who won by 6,000 votes, had a message for Johnson. The winner, Ellen Morgan, overturned a Tory majority of almost 23,000, declaring that the party is over for the Prime Minister.
Tonight, the people of North Shropshire have spoken on behalf of the British people. They've said loudly and clearly, Boris Johnson, the party is over. Your government, run on lies and bluster, will be held accountable. It will be scrutinised, it will be challenged, and it can and will be defeated.
The Prime Minister has been embroiled in scandals over breaking lockdown rules last winter, and he recently faced a major rebellion in Parliament from his own party's members of Parliament. Conservative Party Chairman Oliver Dowden commented on Liberal Democrat victory and said he doesn't think it will change anything.
Voters in North Shropshire were fed up and they've given us a kicking. And I want voters to know that we as a Conservative Party and I as a Conservative Party chairman have heard that message. This was a by-election in unique circumstances that began with the resignation of the incumbent MP over sleaze allegations and continued with numerous stories that you don't need me to repeat around alleged parties and so on. The only point I would make is that mid-term, if you're expecting a surge of government, of the new government, of the Labour Party, you would have expected them to win this by-election. In fact, they sank from a strong second place. So this feels more like a mid-term by-election and not like a sea change.
The North Shropshire seat has existed since the 1830s and has always had a Conservative Member of Parliament until today.
US President Biden issued during a meeting of his coronavirus task force a dire warning to Americans who haven't yet received their vaccine as the nation prepares to battle the Omicron variant, and urged Americans to get their coronavirus shots, whether it is the first one or a booster.
Send a direct message to the American people. Due to the steps we've taken, Omicron has not yet spread as fast as it would have otherwise done, and that's happening in Europe. But it's here now, and it's spreading, and it's going to increase. For unvaccinated, we are looking at a winter of severe illness and death for unvaccinated. For themselves, their families, and the hospitals they'll soon overwhelm. But there's good news. If you're vaccinated, you have your booster shot, you're protected from severe illness and death.
Brussels hosts the Eastern Partnership Summit, which includes on one side the European Union and on the other 6 Eastern European countries, including Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, Georgia, Azerbaijan and Armenia, amid rising tensions between Russia and the West. Hussein Berkan reports.
European Union leaders seek to save Eastern Partnership with Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, Armenia, Azerbaijan, 5 former Soviet republics. This partnership is part of the European Neighborhood Policy, which seeks to strengthen relations with the 5 former Soviet republics and tackle important issues such as the rise of Omicron infections and the Ukraine-Russia crisis. In this regard, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, reiterated the European Union's support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and expressed Europe's readiness to respond firmly to any further Russian aggression.
About the Russian military buildup along Ukraine's eastern border. We are calling on Russia to de-escalate and refrain from any further aggressive acts. We assured Ukraine of our steadfast support and commitment to its sovereignty and to its territorial integrity. And there should indeed be no doubt the European Union will respond firmly to any further aggression against Ukraine.
Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on the other hand, emphasized that it is important to have sanctions applied before rather than after conflict happens.
What we've emphasized is that it's important to have sanctions applied before rather than after a conflict happens, because if they were applied after the conflict, that would basically make them meaningless. We have a war that's been going on now for 8 years, and we understand that only if the sanctions are applied prior to the armed conflict. They would become a prevention mechanism for any possible escalation.
The leaders of France, Germany and Ukraine sought to revive talks with Russia while keeping pressure on it, to prevent what the West says could be preparation for a new offensive on Ukraine soil.
Fourth term for Mark Rutte is set to join forces in the next Dutch ruling coalition as Dutch parties agree coalition deal. The government is set to build end in 9 months of negotiations to tackle thorny problems. Marwa Belaiwer on what follow.
After more than 9 months of waiting, a new government in Netherlands is to be built. The 4 parties in the current center-based coalition have decided to renew their collaboration as Prime Minister Mark Rutte is set to begin his 4th term as the head of 4-party coalition government.
Yes, as negotiators we came to an agreement, but of course it still needs to be presented to our parties and debated in the House of Representatives.
The same 4 parties that made up the previous governing coalition, which are Rutte's conservative VVD party, the pro-European D66, the center-right Christian Democratic Appeal and Centre Christian Union, have again negotiated a deal to form the next Dutch government.
I believe we have a good agreement to the end. It comes down to implementing it and putting it into practice.
The deal contains a strong national push for using zero-carbon energy, with a decision to extend the life of nuclear power station in Brussels and construct 2 more. The Netherlands will build 2 nuclear power stations before 2015, aiming to signal a fundamental change in energy policy and to keep a transition to a carbon-neutral economy on track climate goals, according to the new government's coalition agreement.
And now Iran and the United Nations Nuclear Watchdog Agency announced that they have reached an agreement on one of the most serious outstanding verification issues between them, offering a possible breakthrough in negotiations here over Iran's nuclear program. Tehran had voluntarily agreed to allow the International Atomic Energy Agency to replace monitoring cameras that were damaged by an alleged Zionist sabotage strike last summer at a facility manufacturing component for advanced uranium centrifuges. Britain has stated that it will oppose Russian and Chinese attempts to create national sovereignty over the communications arteries, developing technologies and artificial intelligence that will shape the 21st century. Hassan Barkan.
Britain portrays China and Russia as strategic adversaries trying to take control of key technologies such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and microprocess design, which might undermine both Western security and internet relative freedom. According to Britain's new national cyber strategy, China and Russia continue to seek for stronger national sovereignty over cyberspace as a response to security problems. Debates over internet regulations will become more and more a side of systemic rivalry between big powers due to conflict of values. As strong governments and important technology corporations promote rival ideas of technological standards and internet governance, Britain claims that competition will put increased pressure on the free internet. China and Russia have both rejected accusations from the West that they were behind cyber attacks. Moscow and Beijing have both stated that the West has no right to lecture them about hacking or the technology they choose to develop. According to Harvard University's Bulletin Center Cyber Power 2020 Index, the United States remains the world's top cyber power, followed by China, the United Kingdom, Russia, and the Netherlands.
Tens of thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes in the Philippines as one of the year's strongest storms made landfall in the island nation's mid-eastern regions. According to Philippine Senator and Red Cross Chairman Richard Gordon, 2 people have died due to the storm Typhoon Ray, which made landfall in Surigao del Norte Island. 4 children have died and 5 others are injured after falling from a bouncy castle that was blown into the air in Australia. The accident caused by a wind gust happened on Thursday at a primary school fun day in Devonport, Tasmania. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison described the accident as unthinkably heartbreaking.
Young children on a fun day out together with their families, and it turns to such horrific tragedy. At this time of year, it just breaks your heart.
At least 71 people have been killed and dozens injured after a tanker transporting gasoline exploded in Cap Haïtien, the second largest city in Haiti. The damage to the city is extensive, according to the deputy mayor. Nearly 50 houses impacted by the fire, and most of them will need to be demolished. Families of fire victims which took place in prison in Burundi are still in the dark about the remains of their relatives. Legal legislatives called for the government to intervene in the funerals and help the victims' families to gain access to their victims' remains. Islam Seed reports.
7 days after the fire which occurred in the Gitega prison in Burundi, the victims' families are clueless as to the remains of their relatives. Families wondered why haven't they been allowed to take the remains of their victims.
After the fire, we learned that our father was among the victims. We waited for the burial, but in vain, and we organized a partial mourning in accordance with Burundian tradition.
According to legal representatives, the state should have been involved in the funerals.
These funerals should have been organized by the state. Failing that, at least the bodies should have been returned to their respective families so they could organize the funerals themselves. So I dare to hope that it is one of the other options. We're still waiting for that day to come.
The prison has a capacity of 400 prisoners as an ultimate figure, but kept more than 1,500 prisoners inside, which mainly described as a penal establishment. Former prosecutor raises the issue of overcrowding and suggests an alternative.
Freedom is the principle and detention the exception. This principle should be translated into the laws and regulations of Burundi. All those who are serving their sentences and who have already served a quarter of their sentences should have been released if at least their files are in order in terms of discipline.
Officials estimate a number of 38 people died and 69 were injured in the fire. As of 26 November, Burundi's 11 prisons held 12,878 prisoners for a capacity of 4,924, according to the prison administration.
9 people were killed after a private aircraft crashed while making an emergency landing at Las Americas Airport in the Dominican Republic's capital. The flight was en route to Florida from Las Isabela International Airport in the Dominican Republic when it made the emergency landing and crashed just 15 minutes after takeoff. The U.S. military commanders have developed a software tool to forecast how the Chinese government will react to U.S. actions in the region, such as military sales, U.S.-backed military activity, and even visits of the Congress to hotspots such as Taiwan. The Indian government has cleared a proposal to raise the minimum age of marriage for women from 18 to 21, as women's rights activists fear the move could lead to a real disaster. The decision to raise the age was made during a cabinet meeting on Wednesday. Currently, the minimum age of marriage for men is 21 and 18 for women. The United Nations said in a report released that the Colombian government's response to nationwide protests between April the 28th and July the 31st of this year was characterized by serious violations of human rights, and at least 28 of the 46 confirmed deaths resulted from the actions of the police. And now, as a special guest, Indian President Ramnath Kovind attended Bangladesh's 50th Victory Day celebrations in Dhaka on Thursday, which is marked to be the first foreign visit of President Kovind since the COVID-19 outbreak. Islam Sidi reports.
On his 3-day visit to Bangladesh from December the 15th to the 17th, the Indian President Ramnath Kovind will contribute in the 50th Victory Day celebrations in Dhaka on Thursday. The president was invited to the event as a guest of honor by Bangladesh President Abdul Hamid, which is considered to be the first foreign visit of President Covid since the COVID-19 outbreak, and is the only foreign head of state requested to join the celebrations. According to officials, Bangladesh is holding the event as part of its festivity of its independence from Pakistan in 1971. The visit also will include the reconstruction of Sri Ramna Kali Mandir, which was completely demolished by Pakistani forces during Operation Searchlight that year. President Kovind also visited Bangabandhu Memorial Museum and paid his respects to Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman on Wednesday. He also paid tributes at the National Martyrs Memorial of those who sacrificed their lives in the Liberation War of Bangladesh. It's worth mentioning that the two delegations held talks in which President Kovind emphasized on Bangladesh's special place in India's neighborhood first policy. Earlier, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina called on President Kovind, and the two leaders discussed several issues of mutual interests and bilateral cooperation.
Chinese telecoms giant Huawei is looking to build data centers in collaboration with countries in Africa. The latest data center was recently inaugurated in Senegal. Chinese company Huawei has a strong presence in the telecom sector in Africa, as the latter wants to be more connected. Major central banks controlling monetary policy around the globe are shifting the focus away from measures to stimulate the economy hit by the coronavirus pandemic as the inflation rises. The United Kingdom's central bank became the first in a major advanced economy to raise interest rates since the corona pandemic began. Marwa Bilayawar.
The British Central Bank had kept the rate at a record low of 0.1% to deal with the coronavirus pandemic, as the bank's Monetary Policy Committee had voted to increase the bank rate by 0.15 percentage points to 0.25%. The Bank of England is moving toward tighter monetary policy to curb inflation, citing, quote, significant upside news in core goods and to a lesser extent services price inflation, end quote. The European Central Bank, for the 19 countries that have adopted the euro plans to gradually slow their stimulus program, decided to end its asset purchases by the end of March while temporarily expanded its quantitative easing to prop up the economy.
Inflation has risen sharply owing to the surge in energy prices, and also because demand is outpacing constrained supply in some sectors. Inflation is expected to remain elevated in the near term, but should ease in the course of next year.
The United States Federal Reserve said that it is withdrawing its quantitative easing program sooner than planned. Policymakers predict hikes in the benchmark short-term interest rate, which has been kept near zero.
The economy have continued to contribute to elevated levels of inflation. In particular, bottlenecks and supply constraints are limiting how quickly production can respond to higher demand in the near term. These problems have been larger and longer lasting than anticipated, exacerbated by waves of the virus. As a result, overall inflation is running well above our 2% longer run goal, and will likely continue to do so well into next year.
The moves come despite the threat that the new Omicron variant of COVID-19 poses. The central bank moves seem to show a disconnect from government warnings about the spread of Omicron and the accompanying new travel restrictions and testing requirements.
And finally, Congolese rumba has finally been approved to join the International Intangible Heritage of UNESCO after the application made by the Democratic Republic of Congo. The decision was revealed on Tuesday to consider the guitar-led Congolese variant of rumba to gain more credibility in the world of music. Ayedi Usama reports.
Good news for African music fans in general, and Congolese rumba fans in specific. The United Nations Scientific, Educative and Cultural Organization has finally decided to add this African variant of the Cuban rumba to the International Intangible Cultural Heritage. This decision came after the two countries, the Democratic Republic of Congo and its neighboring country Congo, jointly applied in the UNESCO for the admission of this guitar-led and dance-based musical genre to the heritage of the world culture. The announcement came as a relief for many artists who practice this musical genre. Democratic Republic of Congo's Cultural Minister Catherine Kathungo-Fura announced plans to organize a series of activities, including lectures, radio and television broadcasts, exhibitions, and the possibility of creating a museum for Rumba. The application for the inscription of Rumba on the representative list of intangible heritage of humanity was made in March 2020. The Rumba, according to UNESCO, is considered an essential and representative of the identity of Congolese people and its diaspora. It is perceived as a means of conveying the social and cultural values of the region and of promoting intergenerational and social cohesion and solidarity. Rumba has been marked by the political history of the two Congos before and after the independence and is present in all areas of national life.
That's all for this half hour. I'll meet you again in our 6 p.m. edition. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.